I have a love-hate relationship with Magic the Gathering, as can be seen from this video on my main channel, link in the description. And though I have many criticisms for Wizards of the Coast as a company, and for aspects of Magic's design, we're not here to discuss any of that. Well, a little on Magic's design, actually. There's one card from the original Innistrad set that I feel captures all the themes and intricacies of Innistrad as a plane, its lore, and its history. Unburial Rites. Not only is it a good card mechanically, it's an amazing card in terms of lore and themes. The name, a reference to the rituals and practices surrounding the interment of the dead, except inverted. The art, a beautifully rendered but ghastly depiction of what was once a wealthy or important individual, having risen from a stone coffin, now wailing at the iron bars of their tomb. Also, maybe, a tongue-in-cheek reference to a popular meme. The effect, a creature reanimation card, which itself can be played from the graveyard, giving bonus flavor. The flavor text, all crave the blessed sleep, few receive it. A perfect design. If OG Innistrad had a mascot, it would be this card. However, this card also showcases the primary issue that plagues all of Innistrad, the undead. Ghosts are a bit harder of an issue to solve, but zombies? Zombies are formerly living, now rotting, flesh and blood. Purely physical beings. In order to have a zombie, you need a partially intact corpse. So, the solution is obvious. Cremate all of the dead bodies on Innistrad. Problem solved. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe, and consider supporting my Patreon. Okay, clearly, given the current timestamp on the video, this simple fix isn't quite as simple as that. The main obstacle is a single card, Harvest Pyre. The flavor text reads, corpses destroyed by fire form the most destructive geists. Not people, corpses. Everything else in the lore of Innistrad points to the idea that the creation of geists, and the type of geist which is formed, has everything to do with how a person died, not what happens to their body after they've already died. This flavor text, which is the only mention of this phenomenon, clashes with the rest of the lore, and I think I know why. It's because cremation is an obvious solution to the zombie problem. But what happens if the creative and design teams don't want to bother having to solve the contradictions which this solution would create? You just write in a bullshit rule and hope no one calls you on your bullshit, so you can eliminate questions about burning the dead before they even appear. Let's assume cremation is still an option. You'll understand why as we continue. Now, Innistrad has a long and storied history of gothic horror. Typifying this horror is the idea of the dead not always quite staying dead, often returning to aggressively encourage the living to join them. More mystical forms of undeath are assisted by man-made acts of grave defilement. Stitchers, necromancers, and necro-alchemists all create undead abominations, plaguing town, farm, and village alike. This is a problem the denizens of Innistrad have been facing for such a length of time, one would figure at least some among them would start a tradition of burning bodies, intoning the burial rites of several real-world cultures, except now with a much more existentially relevant motivation. But how do we reconcile this against the perfect design of unburial rites? How does one make efforts to solve the zombie problem within this gothic society without erasing what makes said gothic society so engaging? Therein lies the major problem I have with much of Magic's narrative design. It's a problem I highlighted in the video I referenced at the beginning of this one. It's a problem that rears its ugly head in many story sets across Magic's history. Some common examples being how nicely designed Strixhaven and Ikoria were card-wise, but the narrative and stories that laid the foundation for those cards was utterly abysmal. There would appear to be what I would call a certain amount of necessary laziness. I mean, why bother asking silly questions like, why don't Innistrad people cremate the bodies of their dead in order to prevent them from coming back to eat their faces? The entire point of Innistrad is that zombies and other gothic horrors are coming in the night to eat your face, so there's no problem to solve. And yes, from a player perspective, this makes perfect sense. It is, however, the job of writers and designers to solve difficult problems in order to give audiences and consumers the best possible product. So, Innistrad is 14 years old, and besides making me feel incredibly old myself, it is also a beloved and well-regarded Magic the Gathering set. I will be the first to admit that Innistrad doesn't need fixing. It is perfectly fine as it is. If that's the case, then why am I doing this? Because, and this is just my opinion, but the best way to solve design problems that have major flaws like Strixhaven, Ikoria, March of the Machine, and others, is to figure out how to solve problems which don't actually need to be solved. So let's solve this problem. How do we have our zombies and cremate them too? We first need to operate under the assumption that cremation is a tradition on Innistrad. Whether through funerary pyres or crematoriums, the dead are sent off with either celebrations of their life or somber lamentations of their passing. This would clearly be a problem for the more malevolent forces and denizens of Innistrad, many of whom would love to see hordes of the dead shambling all over the place. Whatever is a demon or necromancer to do? Well, each solution such a ne'er-do-well would come up with would have interesting lore implications, so let's explore a few of the easier ones. Kidnapping people is the most straightforward solution to the cremation problem. If a handful of people disappear from a few dozen small villages each, those same people can be murdered, tortured, experimented on, or all of the above, and then unleashed upon some unsuspecting town. This solution also fits nicely into pre-existing lore, so win-win. Now, if you're a poor sod living on some dirt farm in Kessig, and some mysterious stranger tells you he'll give you a gold coin now to steal a few bodies of recently deceased villagers, and another on delivery, well, you tell me, how many dirt farmers are gonna pass up such a lucrative offer? In my humble opinion, Innistrad would have a thriving corpse smuggling business, where the buying and in many cases the making of new dead bodies as well, would form an entirely separate underground economy. Pun intended. Here's an option for the truly enterprising Stitcher or Necromancer. Why do the difficult task of stealing bodies or trying to get away with murder, when instead you could simply do what modern day politicians do? Lie. You're a wealthy aristocrat with a penchant for mixing chemicals and creating abominations, but the pesky townspeople keep burning those precious corpses. Well, just begin to propagandize that the burning of bodies is actually against the will of the church and Avacyn. If you pay off enough high-ranking priests and cathars, after a few years, you could begin to malign the practice of cremation in a few towns and villages. All that's left is to very generously establish a cemetery for the poor townsfolk, and boom! A never-ending supply of bodies. Now, beyond the inherently humorous way I've approached this, what I've laid out fixes the problem I proposed, having zombies and cremating them too. The idea of establishing cremation as an obvious solution for one of Innistrad's problems, but crafting the solution and lore to make sure that there are still major and sensible obstacles to enacting this solution. Now imagine taking the same approach to solving Magic the Gathering's other story and narrative problems. Hell, let's go a step further. I bet that any one of you watching this video right now who has a vested interest in the lore and design of Magic the Gathering could come up with a few suggestions to solve problems in the game's story and narrative. Go ahead and write some of those ideas in the comments below. It is the job of writers and designers to do this. We as players and consumers shouldn't just accept sloppy storytelling, especially in the case of Magic, where Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro are doing the bare minimum to shovel out lackluster products, all the while strangling the market. I would never claim to be an amazing writer, but if even some nobody like me could fix a minor and ultimately inconsequential lore problem, the professional writers and designers at Wizards of the Coast can and should be doing so much better. It isn't difficult. We very much can have our cake and eat it too. We can have our zombies and cremate them too. Alright, the real end of the video has arrived, and thank you for watching. If you want to support these journal entries, consider subscribing to the channel, liking this video, or signing up for my Patreon. I'll see you next time.